Welcome to SunScream, a spooky evenings production. Tonight's guest is Matthew M. Bartlett, the author of Gateways to Abomination, Creeping Waves, The Stay Awake Men and Other Unstable Entities, of Doomful Portent, and Dead Air Early Broadcasts. Today, my guest is Matthew Bartlett. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. I have to tell you, in preparing for this summer reading series, I've obviously ingested a lot of horror literature, and I have to tell you, yours is definitely on a different, in a different zone, region, style than everything else. It's actually been, it's like an amuse-bouche, as it were, to cleanse the palate of some of the stuff I've been reading. So yeah, it's definitely been very interesting, and yeah. I had to wonder what you were going to look like when you appeared on my screen.
I early on, when I had a phone conversation with someone who'd only known me from the writing, he was actually scared to get the phone call, and what he got was just like a goofball because, but when I started writing, I wasn't reading a lot of what was being currently published, and I was kind of just going off on my own little path, and I kind of thought that would pretty much doom anything I did to obscurity. But happily, apparently there's people out there who appreciate a strange or a different method for storytelling.
I think any interview with you must begin with the question, are you looking for a good time?
Always.
Yeah, I mean, I in my notes, I wrote down like different authors' styles I thought about while I was reading, and you can take these for better, for worse.
Okay.
I wrote down T.S. Eliot, Proust, and Hunter S. Thompson.
Definitely Eliot. I love The Wasteland in particular, and then Hunter Thompson, absolutely. Been reading him for a very long time. Proust, I'm pretty much, not even pretty much, entirely unfamiliar with, other than I know of Remembrance of Things Past, as anyone who has a passing knowledge of anything does, but not really a Proust reader. Would you? I assume you'd recommend him.
Well, I mean, it's not dissimilar to Eliot in that it's this purging stream of consciousness that tends to get flurried. You're sort of like the naughty brother of the four, I guess, in terms of the style.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah,
I've also been told Richard Brautigan, Bataille, which I didn't really. I don't really
George
see
Bataille.
Yeah, I don't really see the connection there, and people thought
probably something like Story of an Eye or something.
Yeah, which I bought because somebody told me that it reminded that they thought I had been heavily influenced by it, when in fact I'd never read it at all. And a lot of people thought I'd been heavily influenced by movies by Fulci and Mario Bava and all that, and I hadn't really seen a lot of those either. So it's always interesting to see.
I was thinking a lot more older weird fiction, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started writing, it was mainly the unholy triumvirate of Lovecraft, Ligotti, and Robert Aickman. That was in the horror area. That was pretty much all I was reading. And then Hunter Thompson, J.D. Salinger, Vonnegut, just John Irving, or range of the usual sort of American lit major stuff, and poetry in there too, obviously, a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely got the sense of Lovecraft's more poetic kind of work, not his more sort of like structural pieces like Innsmouth, but sort of the ones where you're like a disembodied voice trapped in a tower or something,
Right.
Which, I mean, makes sense for you because a lot of it's situated in this this radio station, this WXXT.
Right.
What was the basis for that project? Were you sort of imagining it originally as almost something like this, going out into the world and infecting people's minds and in an Artodian way, causing chaos and riots in the streets?
No, it was when I started writing, it was 2004, and I had a live journal page that I did, blogging sort of stuff on, and personal stuff. And someone I was friends with started a fiction-based live journal page, which I was immediately kind of enraptured with the idea. His was more of a comedy-based thing about a small town and the workings of the small town. It was very, very funny, and I thought, well, I want to do one. And I thought, well, I'm a fan of horror, Stephen King, all that. So also at the time, I was listening to a cassette someone had given me of a radio monologue uh, slash radio artist named Joe Frank, um, who for a long time on public radio had these uh, metafictional and fictional and broadcasts, and sometimes long discursive monologues, and the idea of a voice sort of talking to you in your car in the middle of the night as you're driving somewhere was an idea that appealed to me. And I live in Western Massachusetts. At the time, I lived in Northampton, which is a very old city. If you look at the pictures from the 1800s, it looks the main downtown looks pretty much exactly like it does now, just different colors or no color in the older pictures. But so I had the perfect New England setting, a small city surrounded by a lot of woods, and the radio idea. And I just kind of was posting these short stories, sometimes very short vignettes, or little prose poems to maybe 10 or 15 friends. Um, one of whom, Tom Breen, who is a writer I strongly recommend, um, was a longtime friend of mine, but he was also a reader of horror fiction and a lot of the contemporary work that I was not reading. And almost from the beginning, he was pleading with me to try to get this stuff published. And I thought, no one's going to publish this. It's tiny little segments of stuff, and then, 10 years later, I had accumulated a lot of those and self-published it as a single piece that ended
This
up
was
being kind of like a mosaic novel rather than a collection of short stories.
so this was Gateways, or
Yeah, yeah.
so,
And
so
some of it
Gateways to
appeared in Creeping Waves as well.
so creeping. I mean, Gateways to Abomination is sort of like the establishment piece, I feel like,
Right.
to almost
Yeah.
like your own larger mythos of this universe you're creating and still weaving in some ways.
Right. Right. It's the basis. Yeah, definitely. And at the time, it was everything. When I self-published it in the summer of 2014, I had pretty much nothing else except whatever I had not used from LiveJournal, some of which went into Creeping Waves, which is kind of a sequel. But I had to kind of gear up because Gateways got more notice than I thought it would, and suddenly the idea of writing longer stories was open to me, and I had to sort of teach myself how to break out of the short vignette thing and do longer, more sometimes, in some cases, many cases, more traditional pieces.
Okay. You also partnered with Cadabra Records, right? And did a White Noise.
Yes.
I mean, it's interesting. You have this like Lynchian kind of relationship to transferences and sound and obscure poetry kind of plots.
Hmm. Yeah, I love all that stuff, and I was fortunate to meet Jonathan Dennison, who is Cadabra Records, at a convention, and he works with very few living writers. And at the time, it was just Thomas Ligotti and John Paget, and otherwise he was sort of going back through Poe and Lovecraft, obviously, and Machen and things like that. So to get on board that, to become involved with that was a great uh, feature of my ever-changing strange career, to get to record these things and have, very strange, wonderful music behind it. Yeah, my association with them is one of my favorite things about this the whole process.
Yeah, I
They
mean
do great work.
they do an amazing job in terms of just like the quality of the pressings and the artwork and just tip to
They
top. It
do
just
a lot of care goes into it. It's not a tossed off thing by any stretch of the imagination. A lot of detail, liner notes, beautiful artwork, strange, great music. I mean, it's the whole package with Cadabra.
I collect a lot of their their Lovecraft pieces that Andrew Lehman records for them.
Yeah.
Um, so I that has been a labor of slow amounts of time and accumulation in terms of acquiring. The other sort of like comparison I wanted to make to you and your oeuvre, as it were, is it's like Garrison Keillor Goes to Hell.
I think I've heard that one too, and I've not heard a lot of Garrison Keillor. Um, but from what I know of his stuff, yeah, I like that idea. That's a good. I like that idea.
Well, it's funny because his whole thing is Lake Wobegon, right? And I'm just
Right.
like, well, on the other side of Lake Wobegon is clearly clearly a WXXT radio station is
Right.
over on the
Right.
other side of Lake Wobegon, where it's really the woe part is a lot
Oh yeah.
stronger.
More of a lake of fire and all that. Yeah.
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 Um, yeah, it's so interesting because you have this interesting use of language that I mean that's the first thing that stuck out, of course, is where the relationship to Hunter S. Thompson came from for me, particularly like the lists you do of things.
Yeah. 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 Lists I kind of get from songwriters a lot. Like uh, Bob Dylan songs will sometimes just be this rambling list of items and things, and Roger Waters as well, from Pink Floyd, often did lists, and also did something else I like to do, which is stories in part one, part two, and part three that are sort of riffs on a theme, or related to one another in some way. So I take a lot of that in from songwriters.
Okay. Um, I mean, where do you envision this going in its own way? Because I have to I mean, it's the phrase unfilmable is bandied about a lot, but I think we could safely say
Yeah.
that you would need a director of profound imaginative usage,
Probably, yeah. I
like
have an idea,
Jarodowski or something.
right? No, I have an idea of a third WXXT based book that is more like a novel than the previous fragmentary ones, where the basic plot would involve a fictionalized um, version of the Federal Communications Commission descending on Leeds in order to shut down the station, and their little team would be comprised of a former practitioner of black magic, a right-wing radio host, and this sort of cadre of religious slash mystics, um, who want to put the whole thing out of business, and then the ensuing battle and the townspeople caught up in the middle of it, and that would be more plot driven, but probably still also impossible to film.
Was that like the
Work.
prequel then? Because I mean, that kind of happened in
Well, they
Gateway.
in Gateways, an investigator from the FCC showed up like a contract worker
Yeah,
and was
but he shut it
dispatched.
down, right?
No, he was dispatched before he could do
Oh, that
anything.
okay. I
Yeah.
took it that he tried to shut it down, that the goat had restarted it.
No, yeah, he just uh, poked his nose around and then got dispatched.
Yeah,
So
very violently.
yeah, so the new book would start, I think, with the upper echelons of the organization trying to find out what happened to him, uh, and going from there. Another interesting facet of the whole thing is that um, former living person Calvin Coolidge was the mayor of Northampton for a period of time, and
Okay.
he also was involved in the formation of the FCC. So he would be a character in the book in flashbacks. So
Okay.
I have the whole thing rattling around in my head, and once some other projects are cleared out of the way, um, I can probably dig into that.
It's definitely a wild trip. I mean, because not everything, which is fine. Not everything relates to like the central story in
No, no.
either in either Abomination or Gateway to Abomination or Creeping Waves.
Yep, there are definitely separate sort of side stories that kind of are their own their own thing.
Yeah, it's just this bizarre town, right? That
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the surrounding woods where
Yep.
and the time is also just not a really solid structure either.
No, time, geography, everything is pretty malleable.
Yeah. Um, I will ask you this in terms of, because is rather reoccurrent. Like violence and sexuality is pretty common
Mhm.
in these stories. Um, is this intentional? Is this coincidental?
Um, Probably coincidental. Any sexuality that's there is definitely twisted and probably less explicit than one thinks upon returning to it. I think the way
I'm going
I
to
wrote it,
disagree with you, but okay.
there are people who thought it was incredibly obscene and explicit, and then went back and realized that I kind of talked around a lot of things. There's not a lot of what's the word? There's not a lot of specific anatomical references, let's
Oh no, I
say.
mean, it's more like the fetishization of the act before it occurs, I would say.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, a lot of my narrators and characters are uh, dejected monsters of some kind or another with, uh, let's say, the kind word would be intimacy issues. Sure.
Well, I mean, so you have the young boy who sleeps with the neighbor woman. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, that one. Probably less said about that, the better. No, that was just kind of an idea I had um, um, from like a family that lived near me when I was growing up, and nothing, anything near all that happened. But twisting it around and um, putting it in that story, yeah, that's a. I think that is the one that people thought Story of the Eye was
okay.
inspired by to some degree or another. But yeah, it's just a sick little story of a neighborhood mom who goes after our narrator and ruins him for life.
Well, it's sort of like you take the song Jesse's Mom and you
Yeah.
follow it to like absurdity and beyond, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It definitely is not. Uh, yeah, it's probably transgressive. I don't like to necessarily think of myself as transgressive, but that story probably crosses a couple of lines.
It's, I mean, I don't know. It's, if you think to something like, say, if you think like Fellini's 8.5, right? You think the
Mm.
Saragina, right? You think the prostitute that the young boys all pay to have sex with, or if you think, I mean, I can see why people think of Fulci with you because they probably thought of Don't Torture a Duckling.
Which I
Uh,
haven't seen actually. It's on my list. I've been pretty much running through a lot of the old Italian movies every morning, and that's coming up on the list.
that's probably why they were thinking of you because you have a similar idea with like an older woman and a very young boy
Right, right.
in it. Um, but I mean, it also again made me think of Hunter S. Thompson. Made me think of the scene in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas with a guy who sees the one guy licking the acid off of his jacket, and he said, "With
Oh
any
my
luck, the
God,
rest
yeah.
of his life would be ruined."
Yeah. And then there's another striking image of something like acid fanciers get used to the image of their dead grandmother crawling up their leg with a knife in
Yeah.
her teeth or something like that. Um, yeah, definitely a um, dark and violent aesthetic is always uh, appealing to me.
I got that. I definitely got that. So I've read descriptions of the book, and I've not necessarily agreed with how it's described per se. Because it does have like that holy mountain kind of moment to it on occasion. But it's interesting to me because it's like we never meet per se in terms of like the radio station is existent, right? But we don't have like a Frasier episode, for lack of a
No,
better word. You know what I mean?
no, I know what you mean. Yeah, it's just kind of out there in the background, hinted at, maybe seen through the trees, but not much more than
Yeah.
that. Yeah, there's
So I
not
mean,
necessarily a physical location.
yeah, and when you read descriptions of the work, people want to make it more concrete in that way, I find.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, do you have an opinion on that? I'm curious because
Not really. People
they're
can.
ascribing something to you. I'm giving you a chance to fight back now.
I don't know. I don't think I've really seen too much that I would object to. What I like is the fact that it's a little open to um, um, people's reading in, and that's probably a positive thing. I would never um, discourage someone from sort of applying their own imagination to what they're reading, adding things that aren't there. That's fine. Not anything I have an issue with.
Okay. Yeah, it's a fascinating idea though, in terms of it's clearly a physical space because I mean, obviously, we see at times aspects of it be engaged
Right.
with, but sort of its geography and everything is amorphous
Hmm.
to the town itself of Leeds, and
Yep.
it's just I read one thing that's sort of like the idea of witchcraft as itself just personified within
Mhm.
the radio station. It's like emitting spells almost, each of these little,
Exactly. Yeah. Incantations and
yeah.
things like that. And whatever people hear on there, the thing I did with the book is that you'll think you're reading through a story and then you realize that it's been a radio program. But then you'll also encounter characters who um, have heard these radio programs and what they do to their fragile uh, mental metaphysical states, which is usually nothing good.
No, I mean, it's very sort of like insanity inducing, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's meant to be like a kaleidoscopic uh, insanity and mayhem and gore.
And see, this is where I think you fit into this sort of like second kind of generation Lovecraftian weird tales kind of fiction. I mean, not too much of it's being written at present, but I mean, it's been a continual genre for over 100 years.
Right. No, I'd
Um,
love to be thought of as being on that continuum. Um, and that's another thing that makes me very happy to be involved with Cadabra Records because they seem to favor those old weird tales sort of styles and sort of to sort of fit into that while still being hopefully continuing to be unique is something I'm pretty happy with, proud of.
yeah, I mean, if you think, if you remember the movie Mouth of Madness,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I feel like these stories are the kind of books that he's writing.
Mhm.
Like the actual Sutter Kane stuff. Like
Right,
Stephen King stuff is actually too narrative for what this guy
right.
is clearly writing.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It's twisted stuff. Um, and I sort of sometimes go away from that and go into what I hope is more of a traditional sort of weird tales, eerie tales, but I always am drawn back to more um, surreal, evil, violent, bloody stuff for whatever it's worth.
Would you say? I mean, I can see just behind you and around you, there's books everywhere. So I'm assuming there's like this love of language itself too that you have.
Yeah, that's been a long time thing. My parents were both English teachers, and my wife's dad had an online bookstore and had a house filled with books, and we inherited a lot of books from him and from her uncle, the, and now working in a bookstore and getting a something of a discount, it's becoming probably a problem. You can't, but behind the chair that you see behind me back there, that there's a stack of books on a small table that goes almost to the top of the chair. Around the corner from that, there's a bookshelf that has books piled up. It's probably, if it wasn't books, it would be considered hoarding. But yeah, I've always um, been in college focused on English. Started out actually in theater and then moved over into English journalism, poetry classes, things like that. It's always been a long time ago. I worked in Barnes and Noble. I worked in Walden Books. So it's, yeah, bookish is probably the appropriate term. My wife and I both.
Um, in terms of that, I mean, we've mentioned some inspirations, but it's for like contemporary ones. What are you sort of like looking toward now as sort of like your peer group, as it were, for the style of writing you do?
Um, uh, well, I mean, are you talking sort of within the sort of weird fiction
Yeah, I mean
community?
I mean it's not a huge realm. People are sort of, I mean, you've got these very, you got sort of like on one hand you have a very commercial set of writing that's being produced today that's clearly marketed with the idea of like this is how you would shoot this shot and film this
Right.
scene, you know.
Right. Oh yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but yours is more this, lack of a better, traditional in its own way form of American horror storytelling.
Yeah. I mean, I currently I've worked with on collaborative pieces with John Paget,
Mhm.
the author of The Secret of Ventriloquism, and he and I are friends. We met on several occasions at conventions and things like that, and just really kind of hit it off and get along. I I think we're sort of fans of each other and are uh, we each have I think an interesting, unique style that overlaps a little bit. I also love Nathan Ballingrud. I think he's doing incredible work, as particularly as he gets pulpier and stranger and more. Um, yeah, I guess pulpier is probably the best term. Big fan of Laird Barron, who does probably the some of the best writing in the field. Um, I like Richard Gavin. I like John Langan's sort of experimental takes on stories, and yeah, so I like sort of to see myself in with that kind of group of people, and then I uh, do forays into more literary fiction. I've been reading Joy Williams and who else? Actually, going into Hemingway a little bit because of the PBS series. Um, so anywhere to draw inspiration from that isn't horror, I think informs the horror ultimately. So I try to, most of what I read is in the horror area, so I do try to jump out of that from time to time.
You do need those moments occasionally.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
haven't found one recently, but yeah.
Well, yeah, it's like you don't want to have it be so insular that you're only reading, contemporaries, and then it all, you all inspired by one another, and then it just kind of disappears up its own behind. So, um, I think in general, the advice that a lot of writers give is to read widely, and I think that is important. But I also favor horror definitely.
Sure.
Yeah.
Um, are you also into the other forms of media around horror, or just in terms of, or just literature?
I like horror movies a lot,
Okay.
and TV series, and I like I tend to like music that tells dark stories, like Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds and the Damned, and less like the black metal and doom metal stuff like that. Usually, I require something of eeriness and melody and strangeness. But yeah, I definitely favor the darker aspects of almost any media.
All right. So favorite cult horror film then?
Um, I don't know how you define called Pontypool.
That's
Is one
pretty
of my
cool. It's definitely
there's a
underground.
I don't even know, and that's another one that someone said, "Oh, you must have been inspired by it," and I had never seen it, so I immediately set out to watch it and liked it. Session 9 and Kill List are two of my favorites. House of the Devil is a favorite.
Oh, House of Devil's great.
Yeah, and now I'm going back, as I said, I'm watching these old Argento. I've had Suspiria on DVD forever, but I rewatched Phenomena, which I really, really liked a lot. Um, Tenebrae I can watch, but I can't find it streaming with subtitles, so it looks like I'm gonna have to grab the Blu-ray probably. And
Yeah, it's always dubbed.
yeah, and the dubbing is not great, so I'm hoping to get a subtitled. I don't mind if it's dubbed. I need subtitles in general,
Mm.
um, just in order to hear. I don't have bad hearing, but I don't know. Maybe I don't have the best sound on my TV or something. But subtitles are kind of standard in the house. Um, what else? Yeah, fortunately, I have a Shutter subscription, and between that and Prime, I seem to be able to find a lot of these old giallos and stuff like that, which I'm really enjoying. Or gialli, I think is the plural.
Yeah, Jolly.
Yeah,
They posted a ton of them in the last few months.
I
Just
know it's been a treasure trove. I try to, like I said, I usually watch about half of a movie every morning before I start writing every day. So,
what did you watch this morning?
I watched the end of Phenomena.
Okay.
Yep.
I like the yeah, I mean the Three Mothers series. I mean, Suspiria is one of my favorite horror films, but the Three Mothers series is in its entirety kind of interesting, and different themes around witchcraft and things are always
Yeah, yeah, and you gotta love the production design, the colors, there's always like pulled back shots of courtyards and trees in the wind and light and primary colors and all that. So I get a huge kick out of all that. And I mentioned earlier the Halloween 3 masks behind you. That's one of my favorite all time favorite horror movies is Halloween 3. Yeah, I love that one.
that's
Loved it since I was a teenager. My friend and I used to rent, go into the old VHS video store, go right to the horror section and find the most grisly looking cover and rent those movies and Evil Dead and um, all that stuff.
yeah, yeah, we actually we had David Weiner on who did In Search of Darkness.
Yep.
And we talked a lot about box cover art and
Oh
the
my God. Yeah.
draw to the teenage boy.
That In Search of Darkness has opened up like uh Pandora's box. There's so many things I need to see that I never saw, So I'm like hastily writing down each movie they cover that I haven't seen.
I'm
There,
really glad it's causing people to watch Fade to Black, because apparently that was just like a lost movie.
what's that?
Fade to Black.
Oh yeah, I don't know if I
It
have.
is on Shutter if you're looking to watch it.
Oh, all right.
Um,
I'll write it down. Put it in my
it's
notes.
about a boy who is obsessed with old movies.
Oh, okay. Sounds good to me.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, sure.
But I mean, it's so 80s. It's so LA in the 80s.
Mm,
I like those. Like I like the almost like time capsule. Like Basket Case is kind of
yeah.
like this too. Like it's a time capsule of a type of New York that doesn't exist anymore.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Those are strange to watch now.
Yeah. I feel like
They're probably
Basket
strange to
Case.
watch then, but
Yeah, I
even
mean
stranger
Basket Case in general would always be strange to watch, but
right. Right.
I feel like that could exist in your universe. I feel like Basket
Sure.
Case is
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
is one that is in Matthew Bartlett. He comes from the big city with his basket.
Right.
I'm waiting for the program to get syndicated.
Yeah. That actually it was one idea for the possible ending of the third book is um obviously what the FCC would want to prevent is syndication. want to prevent it getting out from that little corner of New England like a disease, you know. Um, so that is a thought.
Excuse me. Were you a fan of Lords of Salem then?
I that's one I bought it without having seen it. I just
Okay.
because I don't live too terribly far from Salem, and I like to go there. I know parts of it were filmed there, and that probably is. I'm not a huge fan of Rob Zombie. I don't really like what he did with the Halloween
Okay.
franchise, but I do like that movie, kind of almost despite itself. But yeah, I do like it.
I mean, it's very different than the rest of
Oh yeah,
his.
oh yeah. It doesn't have that what would you call it? Sort of degenerate hillbilly aspect
Yeah,
that he likes
definitely
to
that.
use.
That is definitely missing.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I liked it a lot. There's also there in it. There's like a little scene of surreal stuff and animation that is my favorite part of it. And I think he was inspired to some degree by, and now I'm not going to remember the director's name. Lair of the White Worm director.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. He did.
Um,
That's not going to come to me.
yeah, it's not going to come to me either. But
That's early Hugh Grant.
yeah, very early. Yeah, yeah, and a
um,
really good, very strange horror movie.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Was it? Did the same director do Altered States, or am I thinking of a different director?
The name's not coming to me, so I
Okay,
couldn't.
that's
But I
fine.
know. I mean, I know the film, and I also know. I mean, it's also a Bram Stoker
Right,
story, which
exactly.
is even weirder because
Yeah,
it's nothing like Dracula.
no.
Um, that's a whole other. Bram Stoker's fiction is a whole other kind of worms,
Right.
worms. Yeah, no, that's definitely. I hadn't thought about that film in quite a while.
Yeah, it's been a while
Um,
since I've seen it. Now I know I want to see it again.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's weird from start to finish.
yeah, I remember being very much disturbed by it. You know, as a younger person, wondering like,
Uh,
what the hell is this?
have you seen The Void?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, I would think
Yeah.
that would be up your street.
Yeah. I like the Void pretty well. I know a lot of people had issues with it because they felt it cribbed too heavily from other 80s horror movies, but I liked it on its own terms. You know, it's another good one was what's it called? Southbound.
Oh yeah, the anthology.
Yeah. 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 I love
That's
I'm a
I
sucker
can
for
say
anthology
because that's
movies.
a lot about a radio station too.
Yeah,
There's
and the whole phone conversation between the guy in the
oh
car
yeah,
and oh yeah, that was definitely that's a movie that I didn't like it that much the first time I saw it, and then I completely fell in love with it. Wasn't totally on board the second time I saw
I
it. And
find
probably
myself watching that one
mhm.
over and over, which is weird because it's one of those ones I could, if I'm doing something else, I can put it on because I
Yep,
there's
yeah,
certain parts I want to rewatch.
yep, yeah. That definitely falls into that category for me. Also,
Because that
the
whole
old
town too
anthology.
is weird, right? Like that bar and
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Everything's a little bit off kilter. And yeah, I'm a sucker for anthology films in general. The VHS
oh yeah,
movies, the old Amicus movies that did like Robert Bloch stories and things like that. Asylum was one of them. House that Dripped Blood. Those are those are a lot of fun. Those kind of harken back to the EC Comics sort of thing,
yeah.
with
Well,
usually
I think I
you know
mean like in terms of where weird fiction is today and sort of like how it's mediated and where it's going. I mean, you do have the forms like yours, but I mean, even when I read yours, it's like I want it like be coming out of this radio behind me, like it's kind of like how you feel about it. And so it's strange because we do want these mediated relationships with it, which is interesting because yours is particularly about media
right.
itself.
Yeah, that's true. People often say that I should turn it into a podcast, and my only reply to that really is it would have to have such great production value to even match what people probably come up with in their imaginations as to what all this would actually sound like. Um, that I it would any actual audio beyond just a straight reading would probably just ruin it.
You don't want to do
it's
like an old Orson Welles Mercury Theater kind of.
right, right. It'd be the equivalent of showing the monster too much, in full light or whatever.
Or like the end of Night of the Demon. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because you do sort of like fix it. I mean, I guess the same way as I was saying, those people like make the station itself more concrete than it is. You want, I don't know, you compel us to want things to be more concrete than they are.
Yeah. I hope to do that. I want people to want certain books that don't exist to exist, and radio shows and stations, and yeah.
So I mean, but there's a logic to it with this as well. I mean, I can see where they are saying that, and I mean, then you've produced you've produced a record too,
Yeah,
and so it's inching closer and closer.
Right. It'll probably get there someday.
You'll form a band called the Lords and
Right.
have an eerie drum solo.
Right, just send it around to the radio stations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They actually created one of theirs like a month or two ago where it was like in the box and everything.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I was just like, did you watch the movie? You're nothing good comes from listening to that
it's
record.
not a good idea.
Yeah, just don't. Like, I found this book bound in human skin all in Latin.
Right.
I've been.
Let's
I
go
am a
through it and read
third-year
aloud.
undergrad who took a couple Latin courses. What an unlikely plot.
I know.
To like
I know.
everything.
And that makes it even better.
I mean, everybody becomes Wilbur Whateley all of a sudden.
Right.
There's an obscure one for everybody. Yeah, I mean, it's because you're clearly interested in it as a continuing project. I mean, it's not something you can really leave. I feel like when you started it, it's almost like you've become possessed by the demons which you wrought upon the world. I feel like they demand you to produce more material for them to speak.
I guess so. I like to stray from it from time to time. It always makes it more fun to come back to. Like I have a collection called the Stay Awake Men that's more traditional, short collection of pieces that are unrelated to the whole radio station thing. And that's a good sort of chance to flex other muscles and try to learn, other forms and ways of communicating. And then when I'm feeling like anarchic, I go back to the completely bonkers WXXT stuff and just try to make it lurid and grim and violent. And there does seem to be a certain faction of people who read my stuff who really appreciate that in particular.
Yeah, I mean, we were Juan and I were talking about splatter gore, the genre,
Right.
and sort of like how it's reemerging too.
Yep.
Because if you read like the fact that like Paperbacks from Hell is a real thing, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And just that resurgence of these sort of like pulp fiction horror novels, like in 2021, and it's like, why now? Like, what is the zeitgeist now that's
I don't know. The cycles are very strange and hard to map.
Because it's I was reading some of the titles to it, and it's just like, so some of this, it's like it's hard to believe that it ever was written. I mean, you think about it too, because you think about it, like the Satanic Panic era, the 80s and things. You can see where some of it came from in terms of like you were in the safe way and you saw, demon vixens from outer space was like, by the chewing gum.
Right.
I don't know if that exists. If it doesn't,
Yeah, that's fair game for anyone now who's listening.
just acknowledge me. If it's not, it should.
Right.
Yeah, Clay McLeod Chapman and I were coming up with various titles of books that should exist.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think at some point was goofing around on social media with ideas like that, and then I ended up using one called the blood gargling mimes of Hatchet Pass was my idea, and of course I had to write a story for it.
That's similar to a time, I mean, because we came up with the Adventures of Shits and Giggles
Nice, that's good.
that are two clowns, you know.
Yep, yep, yep. I can picture that very
Yeah,
easily. Yeah,
like Death to Smoochie taken to
yeah.
another
To
plane.
clownish extremes. It's yeah,
Yeah.
it's a lot of actually good horror can come from very silly exercises and trying to come up with garish titles.
um I forget the name of the book. There's one that has like vampire mermaids that are defeated by a man who leads a an army of dolphins
Oh God.
into battle.
Yeah, that's probably too much for me, but that's where I
Yeah,
draw the
but I
line.
mean, like, yeah, I feel like there's no limit in terms of how wild it can get. I feel like we're starting to see the wild, at least in literature, reemerge.
Well, yeah, I mean the thing that I always try to remind myself is that you can do in literature what almost no other art form can do if you try to film certain things that just look silly if you or there isn't the technology to film like the really completely out there stuff. Animation has more of a shot at actually capturing it, but there are really no limits, and it's important to constantly remind myself of that when I if I find myself limiting my imagination. I think letting it kind of take free reign is probably the best way to go, at least in the service of producing something different and hopefully entertaining.
See, I call this the Great Gatsby conundrum
Mhm.
because I view the Great Gatsby as being unfilmable. And the reason
Oh yeah.
why is
Mhm.
because the viewer will never feel about Daisy the way the Gatsby does.
Right, right.
And because of that, the film is useless. Like it's stupid to film it and it works beautifully and poetically on the page, but it just never works on a film.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, there's a lot that just you either have to do something entirely different with it or just leave it alone because it's not going to work.
I don't know. You start to see things like Doctor Strange, right? You know, you start to see some of those things like, well, maybe we're getting there. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be.
But I
Um,
mean, I'm also just much more a fan of practical effects than CGI. So
oh, me too. Oh, yeah, I start to kind of hate CGI, particularly when you go back and watch like The Thing, which has the best practical effects, like really mind-blowing, mind-bending stuff, and the creativity and sometimes puppetry and um, what they use for blood and guts is just so gooey and so much better than a green screen, you know. Um, yeah, I kind of, to some degree, I kind of despise CGI. I wish it had never been invented. It really can take me right out of it. Like people complain about bad practical effects, taking them out of a, you know, of a movie. But it doesn't work that way with me. To me, it's like bad computer CGI, and suddenly I'm like, I'm watching Roger Rabbit now. You
yeah.
know, I'm no longer watching. You know, but if there's something with form and substance and you know a physicality to it that can never really be reproduced by CGI.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, some of your stuff, I don't know how you would ever produce like
Yeah, it would have
a
to.
goat hoof puffing into pink smoke and then I
Right.
should,
It probably yeah. That's another one that probably would lend itself more to animation than anything else.
because I could like I had to like reread it a few times, you know, like to like get my brain to picture it
Mhm.
correctly, you know, because I
Yeah.
wanted to understand it better.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's not a. an easy task that you put.
Mm.
I mean, but magic shouldn't be in its own way, right?
Right, right.
I mean, I view that as a type of magic, at least.
Oh, sure, yeah, man, definitely.
You said you live relatively close to Salem. Are you from this area? Is this an intentional move to be closer to like the
No,
mothership? Like, what is this?
well, I was born in Connecticut, and I came to Northampton, Massachusetts to see Jane's Addiction play in like 1991 or something, and kind of fell in love with the town. And then I moved here maybe 7, 8 years after that, and it turns out that a relative doing a family history discovered that that our ancestors had actually been among the founders of Northampton. So there's a history there I was entirely unaware of. It's not that near. It's maybe 2.5 hours from Salem, but still worth a day trip, definitely. But no, Massachusetts just seemed a natural fit for me, and obviously finding out that Lovecraft was from, wrote about and lived in New England was a bit of a draw too. I think he central Massachusetts shows up in some of his work. I think actually the Dunwich Horror was
Mhm.
Central Mass,
And Colorado Space.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's a natural place for for a horror writer to find himself.
I mean, do you think that's because it's the older or oldest area of like Americana in its own way?
Probably, yeah.
I mean,
Yep,
that's at
that
least saturated with, the religious spirit of America versus sort of like, because I'm from Virginia, right, which was an economic center when it was founded, versus Massachusetts, which was a religious center when it was founded, and so it
right. Yeah,
became inhabited
there's
by superstition a lot faster.
yeah, exactly. Plymouth and yeah, it's just the oldness of it, the colonial um, people making their way and sort of fearing everything, and maybe there is something to fear. Um, yeah, I think that really has to do with it. Plus, I mean, the autumn can't be beat for
Oh,
being
sure.
picturesque in New England, and yeah, when you're of that a certain mind, Halloween in New England is there's nothing really like it.
I'm in this room at Halloween.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good room. I saw it right away, and I thought I want more rooms like that room in my house.
um, yeah, it's, we go through these practices and these ideas about horror and Halloween, but I think, in terms of a style too, as I said earlier, I think there's this distinctively American version of it. I mean, if you think of Halloween itself, to stay on this thread, it's, we have a more profound relationship to Halloween than the rest of the world in some ways still, which is odd, because if you go to like different, like if you're in Europe or something, Halloween is just, you know miscellaneously celebrated, if it is at
Right,
all.
right. Yeah, I don't know. It just seems like a tradition very much tied to um, the atmosphere of New England to me. Like they're inextricably tied together to me. Like even if I find out that when I found out that Halloween the movie took place in Illinois, I'm like Illinois should have taken place should have taken place somewhere out here in Central Mass.
I'm not sure why
Uh,
it takes place in Haddonfield, Illinois.
yeah, I'm not sure either.
I mean, it's obviously
Uh,
filmed in California.
right, right.
Um, but yeah, I'm not sure at all as to why it's set there.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Um, of course, our great claim here in Nebraska is Children of the Corn,
Oh, of course, yeah, yeah,
which fits, right? Corn, Nebraska.
absolutely, absolutely.
Um, I think too, like the import of that is like, because they passed a sign for Grand Island, which is the exact geographic center of the United States.
Oh, is it really?
So it's quite literally the heartland.
Ah, that makes sense.
Um, I think I could be wrong,
Right.
but I think that's the logic therein. But I mean, because there's cornfields everywhere. Could have
That's
been
true.
Ohio.
Right, right. Even in New England, we have,
Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah,
I
I mean,
do.
there is that, fall foliage, crisp air, apple bobbing, witch.
Right. State fairs and the smell of, bonfires and things like that. It's
Yeah,
all
like 50
very,
degree days, 30-degree night kind of
yeah, yeah, exactly.
thing
Yeah,
that is horror.
right. Yeah.
And then the storms that you get on coastal New England
Hmm.
is the other side.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's all very dramatic out here in New England.
Maybe that's what it is. It's again, it's so concrete.
Yeah. Yeah. That's probably it. Yeah.
There you go. You got your next thing, the struggle for the concrete,
Right.
the rebellion against it by the worms that don't seep out of people's mouths that come out of the radio instead. That was a
Yeah.
strange moment for me too. I'm not a snake fan, so
No, yeah, neither am I. It's probably why they keep coming up.
I
But I
figured.
am a big fan of goats. I do love goats. They're
I
very,
got that too.
yeah, they're very nice little creatures, with creepy eyes and yeah, there's a lot of fun to be had with worms and goats.
So Wrangle's come out again. You have a third edition of Wrangle out.
Yes,
I think
that was originally a chapbook from Dim Shores. It was the second one that they put out. Publisher, the first one they put out was by Jeffrey Thomas called Ghosts in Amber, and the publisher contacted me and asked if I would write something for it. And Rangel is a very, very, very Halloween centric story, and pretty much exactly the way we've been talking about. The main character has moved to LA and doesn't misses the Halloweens of his youth, but of course the Halloween of his youth is tied to the disappearance of his younger sister in Leeds, Massachusetts, which he returns, and makes some frightening discoveries. So there were two editions of it that came out in 2016, I think, and the artist Aaron Alfrey is one of my favorite sort of dark visionaries. He reminds me of like a modern day Hieronymus Bosch. Um, and Dim Shores contracted him to do the illustrations for the chapbook. So I was talking with them, and he produced a new 2-page illustration of the Halloween parade. That's sort of the culmination of the story. And it's really brilliant, really, really disturbing, a lot of detail. And so, yeah, I put out this self-published, essentially a third edition of the book, with 100 copies available online, and then 50 copies I'm holding aside to bring to conventions and things like that. And yeah, it's doing pretty nicely, and it's
awesome.
nice to see each cover is similar, but there's variation on each cover that makes it a little different from the previous one, and that's a lot of fun too for people who like to collect.
So what's coming up? What's next? I guess is the
Um, I'm currently
proverbial question
working,
you'll always ask, I'm sure.
of course. Um, I'm working on a sequel to Rangel to be put out by Dim Shores, which is exciting and a lot of fun. And what else? A while ago, I sort of self-published, like literally from a photocopy shop, a chapbook called Anne Gare's Rare and Unusual Book and Ephemera Catalog or something like that. And it's a listing of books that don't actually exist. Um, and I've had an idea for a longer short story, and I'm thinking of self-publishing along with the listings of these other books that don't actually exist. So
Okay.
that's a project for this year. And then I'm currently working on a chapbook series called the WXXT Program Guide. One chapbook a month for 2021. People can subscribe. The year subscriptions are no longer available, but they're quarterly subscriptions, so people can subscribe to April, May, June, July, August, September. And these are all um, related to the radio station, but also they're sort of serialized short stories that continue their paths throughout these chapbooks. They're beautifully illustrated by probably a psychotic artist named Matt Fitzsimmons, who has this sort of lurid heavy metal aesthetic to his art. Um, and that's pretty much what's taking up my time um, through the middle of this year. And then after that, I have probably a collection coming out. Not sure when, and I can't say anything about the publisher at this point, but it looks like it's in the works to have a collection, a lot of my stories that were published in anthologies and magazines from 2015 through 2020. So
Awesome. Lots of stuff to look forward to then.
all kinds of stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I very much appreciate it.
My pleasure. And thank you all for watching. And as always, stay spooky. Thank you for joining us on SunScream. Tune in next time for Rachel Harrison, the author of The Return.